Welcome. God bless you. Good to be back with you again. This is the first message in a new series that will go under the title of The Return of Christ. I am excited about it. I have already been blessed by the study and look forward to the future study and preparation for these messages. It is a very important doctrine, one the early church embraced and looked forward to, the return of Christ. And I don't know if it's just me in the small circles I run in, but it just seems like there's an increasing absence of that teaching or that preaching from the pulpit. So I look forward to this, and I would encourage you to encourage others to look at this, subscribe to this, and I believe it's going to be a good series. Well, let's go. We're going to use as our text John chapter 14 as a launching pad into a number of other texts. And this is my favorite promise. In my Bible, I have listed all my favorites. From my favorite day is Sunday, my favorite food, and my favorite color, my favorite bird. I just have 57 favorites listed in the front of my Bible. And number 41 is my favorite promise. And my favorite promise is the return of Christ, and it's found, the text that I chose was John chapter 14. Well, let me quote it for you, and then we'll unpack the first 6 words. We're not going to get very far in it, but we're going to take off. Let not your hearts be troubled. This is Jesus speaking. He said, let not your hearts be troubled. You believe in God, believe also in me. For in my Father's house are many mansions. If it were not so, I would have told you. I go to prepare a place for you. And if I go to prepare a place for you, I will come again and receive you unto myself, that where I am, there you may be also. Now that's our text, and he says in there, I will come again. Well, the first 2 words, let not. The word let it means this. This is the definition of it. It means to allow, to give leave, or to grant permission. It is the first recorded word that God himself used. In Genesis chapter 1, the first 3 verses say this. I'll use these because most people are familiar with this. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. The earth was without form and void, and darkness was on the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. And God said, now we're all familiar with what he said, let there be light. That was the first word God used, and it means this, to allow, to give leave, to grant permission. A few verses later, he uses that word again, let us make man in our own image. When Moses stood before the burning bush and the voice of God spoke to him, he told him to go back to Egypt and to tell Pharaoh to let my people go, to allow them, to give leave to them, to grant permission to them. So I know I'm drum rolling that a lot, but this is very significant because the next word he says is let not. And the word not is a word that expresses negation, denial, refusal. So you've got this let that means allow, give leave, grant permission. Not, the first 2 letters in the word not is no. It's a word of negation. And he's saying deny, refuse. Let me try to illustrate it like this. If someone were to set up a zip line across the Grand Canyon, there are people that would stand in line to ride a zip line across the Grand Canyon. Or not. Did you get that? Some people would. Grant permission. Go ahead. There's some people say, no way. I would be one of those say, I'm not an adrenaline junkie. I don't need to go across the Grand Canyon like that. So let not your heart. Now, your can be used singular or plural. It's used plural here. He's speaking to his disciples in chapter 13, just a few verses before 14:1. He says, by this shall all men know that you are my disciples, if you have love one to another. So he's addressing his disciples. So he's saying, let your, a group, he's saying, let not your, the group, heart, singular. So he goes from the group to the singular. Let me make this comment about the heart. It is hard to be a caretaker of someone else's heart, yet we're responsible to care for the hearts of others. But when he says your heart, he's saying singular. Now he looks at this group and every man knows he's talking to them individually because each man individually has a heart. Let me try to illustrate that in Galatians chapter 6 and verse 2. Well, I'll give you verse 1. He says, if any man be overtaken in a fault, you who are spiritual, restore such an one in a spirit of meekness, considering thyself, lest thou also be tempted. Bear ye one another's burdens, your heart. He's speaking to the group, one another, church. Bear ye one another's burdens, and so fulfill the law of Christ. For if a man think himself to be something, when he's nothing, he deceives himself. But let every man prove his own work, and then he shall have rejoicing in himself alone, and not another, for every man must bear his own burden. If I am ever to be of any value in caring for the heart of another person, I must make sure my own heart is not troubled. Let's go to that next word. Let not your heart be troubled. The word troubled means disturbed, terrified, thrown into confusion. 2 Corinthians chapter 4 and verse 8 says this. Paul says, we are troubled on every side. Anyone who's going to be a realist when they look at life know that there is no place on the planet you can go and there be no trouble. You have a lifetime that's trouble-free. But he's saying, let not your heart be troubled. We're troubled on every side, yet not distressed, perplexed, but not in despair, persecuted, but not forsaken, cast down, but not destroyed. Those are words Paul uses to encourage other people's hearts. Trouble. Galatians 1 verse 6, Paul's first letter that he ever wrote, first epistle. He said, I marvel that you are so soon removed from him who called you unto the grace of Christ unto another gospel, which is not another, but there are some that would trouble you. Let not your heart be troubled. There are people that would love to trouble you. This is a situation we're going to look at and say, Jesus is saying, don't you guys let your heart be troubled. Now, let me give you the context. Why did he just say this? In chapter 13, verse 21, he just told the disciples, one of you are going to betray me tonight. You're going to betray me into the hands of sinful men. A few verses later, in verse 33 of that chapter, he says this, I'm going away, and you can't come with me. The last 3 years, they have ate, slept, and drank. They've left all to follow him. They've been, he says, I'm leaving you, and you can't come. And Peter, a little bit later on in that chapter, says, why can't we come? He's like a little baby. I want to go with you. What do you mean you're going someplace and I can't go? He's obviously troubled over this. And then Jesus looked at Peter, who is the leader, the spokesman for the disciples, and he says, before the rooster crows, you will deny you even knew me 3 times. And then he says, but don't let your heart be troubled. You get the context of that. This is a perfect atmosphere to be troubled. And yet he says, let not your hearts be troubled. Now he's going to talk about I'm coming back. When we think about the return of Christ, it should not be something that troubles us. He comforts our hearts with the promise of his return. To let not, grant permission, allow, and say no to this, he's obviously speaking of a choice, corporately and individually. God gives us the liberty to make whatever choice we want to make. If you want to wring your hands, the world's on the verge of collapse. Climate change, we're all going to die. There's microplastics in our food, our air, our water. If you want to wring your hands and want to bite your nails, I guess you can. But God is saying, I got something bigger to you. And it's something that when you consider it, you should not be troubled. And I think that's the promise he gives us. You can either trust or you can worry. It's a choice. And God taps it into our courts and says, what will you do with this? Well, until next time, I'm going to close with this verse. Looking for the blessed hope and glorious appearing of the great God and our Savior, Jesus Christ. Until next time, God bless you.